Hello, Metatopia. I am Avenel Wing. I am your disembodied moderator for this panel. We are here to talk about creating Too Many Crooks, creating a game with 18 strangers. Manny's going to introduce himself first, and then we'll get to know the rest of our panelists, and then I'm going to ask some questions.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Avi, and thanks, Metatopia, for having us. So my name's Manny Dominguez. I'm, I guess, I don't know what the right term would be, unfortunate leader of the group in a way, sort of by circumstance. As you'll learn a little bit of our project, you'll sort of see kind of the chaotic nature of all of this in this whole process. So I sort of emerged a little bit as kind of a team lead for whatever that's worth. But originally, I'm from Venezuela, from Caracas, Venezuela. I currently live in Savannah, Georgia, in the U.S. And I am an avid, I would say, sort of amateur game designer. I've loved designing and tinkering with games for probably a decade plus at this point, mostly sort of card and board games. And this, as you'll learn, was sort of a really interesting opportunity. Typically, Savannah's not a super game design heavy city, unfortunately. And so I've kind of designed in a little bit of an island for a few years now, and was craving a collaborative project, and this was a really exciting opportunity. But I'll sort of leave it there and hand it off to Jim to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Jim Bottomley. I am another member of this crazy team. 18 of us there are, but I'll let those details spill out as we continue. I am a designer by trade, except not in the board game industry. I'm a video game designer. I've been doing this job since 1993, so I am old and crusty. I come from England originally. I don't live there anymore. Obviously, you can tell by my accent, probably. I now live in Canada, on Atlantic Canada, in PEI, or as I like to call it, Rodney Smith country. I'm literally about 40 minutes away from Rodney Smith's house. Which is like the center of all gaming heaven, as we all know. Like I said, my day-to-day job is as the design director, actually, of a company called Other Ocean Interactive. I don't know if anybody's played Project Winter. I'm going to tout that right now. I'll get it out of the way. I won't mention it again. Project Winter. It was on sale on Steam. I don't know if it's still on sale. You should buy it anyways. Perfect. So we make video games. I've always played board games from being knee-high to a grasshopper. Recently in my years, it's like probably about 10 years ago, I really started getting into board games. I'd lost track of board games as they are right now, and 10 years ago I kind of rediscovered them through friends at work and thought, wow, things have changed. Things have changed so much. I wasn't really aware of the kind of distinction between Euros and Ameritrash, or whatever you'd like to call them, and so discovering all those games has been absolutely fantastic, which led me through multiple kind of paths to Button Shy, which is where we all met. We'll probably come back to that. I probably don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but that's where we all met, and that's where this crazy idea came from. So with that, I'll hand over to Ian, and he can tell us all about himself.
Hi, I'm Ian Howard. Thank you to Metatopia for hosting, and to Abby for moderating, and to all of you for watching. My name is Ian Howard. I am a stay-at-home dad, amateur game designer, and I'm also a writer, reviewer, and associate editor at Meeple Mountain. I've been into games my whole life, designing, playing, etc. And yeah, like most of the people here, it's kind of been a fixture in my life forever. And just in the last 18 months, 2 years, have I really sort of gotten more into the design side, on top of being a reviewer as well.
So, done a fair number of small-scale projects, nothing that involved 18 strangers and game design with a product at the end. This sounds both bonkers and incredibly ambitious. How did you end up in the middle of this?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then these guys can fill in the gaps. But Yeah, I would say it was sort of an unfortunate series of events that kind of started off with a bit of a joke. I had been recently, my first published game had come out with Button Shy, and so I've started to get more involved in their Discord community. And they specifically have a channel for design. And I just, I woke up one morning and I was really, really craving sort of a collaborative project. And so I perhaps stupidly posted something along the lines of, "Hey guys, I had this idea, 18 designers, 18 cards." Just for those that don't know, typically Button Shy wallet games is sort of their signature product. They are 18 card games for the most part. So I said, 18 designers, 18 cards in 18 weeks. And I thought that was crazy enough. Within a few hours, sort of all hell broke loose, and everybody was wanting to be a part of it and wanting to be part of the team. And we had gone from 18 weeks to 18 days. There were suggestions for 18 hours. Thankfully, we didn't go that far. But we eventually landed on sort of this craziness of that's all we had at the time. And we'll get into the details a little bit about sort of how we reined that in somewhat, and what some of our initial sort of faltering steps were. But that's how it started. Like I said, within something must have sparked the imagination of the group, because we had a full team within just a day or so, and a couple alternates and Google spreadsheets and mock-ups and all sorts of stuff within just a couple of days. And then and then we sort of, it was too late to turn back at that point. So that's where we left off.
It was too late to turn back because you had 18 days to produce a game.
Yeah, well, sorry, I just like to say, those 18 days, they disappeared really quickly. But anyway.
Yeah.
So talk to us about how, you described faltering steps and the tight timeline of 18 days. How did that actually shake out? When you say faltering steps, what did it look like?
Well,
Go ahead, Jim.
I can start. We can all just jump in. But so when Manny actually posted this idea, it seemed kind of almost so jokish that it had to be kind of jumped at. The opportunity had to be kind of taken. And we all started. So Jason Tagmeyer created a channel for us, so we could all just kind of group together on the Button Shy Discord, and we immediately just jumped in where Angel's Fate tread, and just everybody started designing cards for a game to which we had no rules. It's not the way you do things, but it's what we did. Everybody's kind of, it's crazy. I think there was some initial steps like, what should the theme be, and we very quickly. And guys, you're gonna have to maybe step in here. I can't remember how we came down to the idea of the too many crooks concept, but it seemed like there were so many ideas. I know a couple of the guys had other ideas, but we seemed to very, very quickly, within a day, kind of hone in on that. Maybe we liked the whole idea of the sting, or that kind of idea, but we quickly kind of honed in on that. And then people just started throwing card ideas in, and before we knew it, we had card templates drawn up by Jay over in Australia, and we had other guys that just the momentum just suddenly went crazy. Now, but the problem is like, whoa, it was like it was just craziness. There was no rules by which to abide. Everybody just had all these mechanics coming out of nowhere. So we very quickly realised the chaos. I think Manny said, chaos leads to chaos, and it's true. Chaos does lead to chaos. We had to put the anchors on and say, look, there were some wonderful ideas, but none of these cards would ever work together. It was just absolute chaos. So then we had to take a step back and decide, maybe, just maybe, being a boring old traditionalist, but just maybe we should have to actually come up with a rule set for this game by which we design the content to fit the rule set. Crazy idea, but maybe we should do that. So that's what we decided to do. I can hand it over to Ian maybe to carry that story a little bit further forward as to what we did next.
Can I just add one thing? Sorry, Ian.
Sorry, yeah.
I just want to emphasize one thing that I thought was super interesting. at the time. And I think for a lot of us, this is just like a fun experience, right? I think we went into it, none of us expected it to ultimately be a finished game or even be at the stage that it is now. It was more sort of a fun experience for a lot of us. But I want to emphasize one thing that was touched on, that there was a point in this process where we decided that where the general it was a little bit of mob mentality, right? Like it was like, I've never seen the movie The Purge, but this is how I sort of would imagine it early days. It was just sort of like somebody smashes a window and then we all sort of run in and steal some stuff, and then somebody burns down a car and we flip it over. That's sort of the way it felt early on. And one of those things Jim mentioned, I still think is fascinating, and part of me, the sort of insane part of me, wishes we had gone this way, which was, I think it was who was it? I can't remember. Jason Greeno, I think, was who had this idea, or somebody, I can't remember, just made a template and a card, again, with no rules. It was just sort of a card with like a symbol that he didn't even know what the symbol was. It was just sort of like, I don't know, a symbol of a shoe or whatever. It had a value to it, right? That didn't mean anything, right? And it had
it was great. I'm sure it was,
and a special sort of like a special power to it. And that was it, right? Like it was just like, here it is. And then for a bit, I would say for probably 5 hours or so, we were heading in the direction of like somebody posts a card, and then we sort of figure out what the rules are based on that card, and then so the next person posts a card that changes that entirely, and we sort of go from there. It would have been insane, and it was insane. But that's where we sort of like, I'll let sort of Ian jump in now, sort of how we reined that in a little bit, if you can remember, Ian.
So it's been a while, but we basically were trying to like reverse engineer a game from just a distinct card pool, which now that I think about it, it was just impossible. But we tried it for a couple hours and realized it was impossible. Moving forward from there, I think what came next is then we actually sat down and had people write out some rules. That Too Many Crooks idea was super popular. I think most of the rules kind of revolved around that. And then we ended up, everybody who wanted to submitted a rules document. They were pretty rough for the most part, but they got the point across. We ended up getting, 7 or 8 of those, I would think. And then we kind of took a vote, and then once we had the rules sort of firm, I mean, it was a rough draft, then we could actually sit down and start creating cards, which ended up being kind of an interesting thing too. When you get 18 designers all together, you realize that there are 22 different ways to make cards. Each designer has one, and then one that their friend told them about that they've only used once or twice. So we really started the nice thing about living in a virtual world is that there are so many different ways now that you can collaborate, despite the fact that we're kind of all over the globe, different time zones, way different sort of ideas on what we wanted the game to be, but we could all communicate in real time with Discord. And then we could use things like, Google Docs to kind of share ideas, comment on each other's ideas. And then we ended up using Figma, which is like a graphic design tool that is collaborative focused, to actually kind of get cards up and running. And then for some people, as it turns out, we all have our different methods of designing things. Some people are not as familiar with, like Figma, and so we could sort of have some people naturally take on a role where they sort of curated that, So over time, we kind of built these like little teams that could kind of go out and work on the smaller aspects instead of all of us trying to do, 18 different cards and 18 different, programs. So,
Okay,
but it was all very like natural.
I have a question though. I've been a convention organizer for about 25 years now. So the idea that you got 18 people to pick a single rule set in the course of a couple of days is absolutely baffling. What did that process look like?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
So that was interesting because this is the other thing is like these are and I think Ian sort of touched on this. These are 18. These aren't just 18 random sort of people on the street. These are 18 designers, and so are game designers. So everything was like a game, right? Everything had to be like, what are the exact rules and how do we do this? And not just that, but I would say maybe half the people were perfectly happy with just utter chaos, and then the other half were terrified of not having strict rules. And so it's a lot of different personalities. So what we ended up doing, which was this is one of like 500 things I've learned throughout this process, like new ideas, new pieces of software, new things that I've learned along the way. I don't know if it's true for the other folks, but certainly for me, it has been. So we ended up doing, we had I think 8 or 9 submissions. We did ranked choice voting, which I hadn't used before. I was sort of generally familiar with how it worked. But I knew that it was going to be impossible to get any sort of decent majority on any one rule. And so we ran, I think it took like 7 sessions of ranked choice voting to finally get to that final number or that final rule set. And Jim had our successful rules. I think he sort of nailed it. It was like in line with the theme. It was perfect.
We gave ourselves, I can't remember now, was it a week? I think we gave ourselves a strict week where it was like all submissions must be in by a week. And then the night that everybody was voting, I was out. I was actually playing Gaslands at a friend's house. And I just thought, I'd read some of it, because obviously, some of the designs came in dribs and drabs. And some of the designs I was looking at going, oh, they're awesome. Because, I mean, bear in mind, I am not a board game or card game designer. I'm video games, and I don't know what people think about that. I see these people who cross the divide almost seamlessly. I'm so jealous, because I don't. Board games and card games are a mystery to me. As much as I play them, as much as I understand mechanics, the way they gel together, maybe it's just the way my mind works. I'm a very touchy-feely, intuitive kind of designer. So mechanically, I don't see things as intuitively mechanically as maybe some people. So I'd written a design I thought was okay. I thought it was fine. But I know there were other people's designs out there that there were at least 3 or 4 that I went, they're better than mine. They're going to make a much better game. So I went away to play Gaslands that night with a friend thinking, awesome, tomorrow I'm going to come, I'm going to work, I'm going to create a card for somebody else's game that's better than mine. Job's a good one. Easy. And I came back and it was like, oh, well done, Jim, well done. I'm like, oh, no, really? No, guys, don't choose me. I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Careful what you wish for, right?
in my defense, one of the tenets that I set myself in the design was to create. Look, we had 18 designers creating 18 cards, and the whole point of this, as you know, we set out to create a game that wasn't necessarily a kind of a. It wasn't meant to be a game that you're going to go and buy, off the shelf, or not even you're going to buy it at Button Shy. We did it just for the kind of the. Sorry, I'm allowed to swear the ones, shits and giggles. We did it because it was entertaining and just to see what the process was like. A lot of us were very into the process, and there's a lot of these guys that already make games. This is a side effort for them. It's not the be and end all. I was really interested in the process, and just Manny's idea of 18 designers is crazy. So I took that to heart. I kind of thought, well, I want to try and create a system that. We knew the game's mechanics were going to be in the cards because we have 18 people designing cards. So the system needs to be as light and kind of rules agnostic as possible in a weird way. It needs to be kind of very, very malleable to rules that are on the cards. We'll come back to that probably in the future because that is causing us no end of problems right now. But that's kind of where I came from. So maybe people... I don't know what people saw in what I wrote. Unfortunately, they did see something, and we picked fine. I thought there were other better designs, but we'll get to that. Yeah.
and I don't think you were like, I submitted something and I did the same thing of like reading other people's, and I was like, oh man, like why did I even submit? Like this is,
That's what I thought.
yeah, but having that, like seeing what other people were working on, and the different way that they would take this sort of same idea and just re-implement it like in a wildly different way, was so fascinating and really cool to see. And I think we got a better sense of what we were looking for by looking at all of those different competing ideas, and
I think
sort
so.
of.
Another interesting thing as well, I think, because we had discussions about what the game should be before we kind of all not so much siloed ourselves, but before we went away and everybody feverishly typed up. And I will just say it was a one pager as well before we started. It wasn't these. I used to, in video games, I'm used to writing game design documents over months that are they can be hundreds of pages long. That's before you even get to data tables and all that kind of stuff. We were kind of basing ourselves on pretty much something that I suppose, at least this is what I took on. This could be potentially a button shy game. Not that we ever had any. And Jason Tagmeyer is also a member of our team as well. So, but it's not something we. It's not like, yes, we will create a button shy game. But the 18 card restriction, that was very much in my mind as well. So, so yes, the one pager, the kind of like, if you can't get your idea across in one page, well, it's obviously not fit for purpose.
Right.
So that was kind of high up in mind as well. Although that document now is kind of spread a little bit further afield than that because it's a working document. But I've lost my train of thought now. But I will say that of some of those one pages, there were some really great ideas, and I've just remembered what I was going to say. There were a few of the designers that had very, very similar ideas, and I'm not sure whether it was the precursors and the conversations that happened before that you kind of you take on board and you then put that into your own work. I know that so Jay and my concepts were very similar in so many respects, and I was thinking, did I copy what Jay had said? Did Jay type something at some point? And I've just plagiarized what he typed. Weird, very strange.
It was an interesting thing because Ian said they were wildly different, and Jim said there were similarities, but really it was a little bit of both. It was a weird.
It was a bit of both, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, like you said, there have been so much discussion. I mean, if you all could see the the hundreds of comments throughout, particularly those first few days, of ideas being thrown around.
And if people do join. If people do join the Button Shy Discord, they can go back and see all this crazy.
Yeah, you can see sort of the early discussions before Jason kicked us out into our own channel. There was just so much energy around it that I think some of these common ideas just sort of like came out of the ether, in some ways for some of these designs. And I will say, I think one of the strengths of Jim's, and a few of them were like this, actually most of them, Ian, I think, touched on this, was that they were simple enough that the rules wouldn't get in the way of abilities or of kind of the creativity of the individual designer, but they had enough hooks in there that someone that wanted to be creative and do something a little bit different could sort of latch on to this one piece, and they could do a card that worked on the loot values of the other cards, or the traits of the other cards, or whatever. I think that was a key thing. Like, I think Jim's did a good job of having simple, easy to follow rules, but enough hooks in there to make it interesting.
Hold on just a second. So then my next question is, you've got the rules. You've kind of reached this zeitgeist where you've settled into a particular design space. What was your next step?
I think we pretty much just got right into making cards. I feel like that was...
How did you divvy them up? Like, how did you decide who was working on what card? Like, that feels like it could end up being a land grab.
Yeah, it's a mix of both. Because we had a schedule, so everybody sort of knew what day their card would be due, and so you would kind of go off and make your card. But because we're all in the same Discord, every single day you're seeing the card of the day. And so there's sort of like this feverish reinterpretation of like, oh, so and so did this, so I could have a card that works with this in this other different way. So that, I think, having that like frame of like one card from one person per day really then allowed us to sort of like snowball ideas.
Can you
Yeah, I just
go ahead?
sorry.
Go ahead. Ben.
No, I
Fine.
just wanted to add to that. That was my favorite part of this whole thing. I think. I mean, the rule stuff was fun, but as soon as we hit sort of that day to day, one new card, that was super fun because it meant, once, if I think I was, I don't know, say I was like card number 5 or 6, right? I might have had an idea of what I thought I wanted to do, and then once I see the first 4 cards, I'm like, no way, this is going to be so much cooler if I play off of Ian's card, that does this really cool thing. And so the rules sort of morphed slightly, based on the first few cards, and then certainly the cards that came after reacted to what came before, which I think was super interesting.
And I think it's
so
like
we all. No, go
ahead.
Sorry, go.
Well, I was just gonna say.
Sorry, my internet's fully.
Ian, go for it.
Okay. So I was just going to say, though, again, it's like you're designing in real time. You're laying a card out there. You're getting feedback. We're adapting the rules. Everything's happening like in real time, in a way that you might not always do when you're designing a game. That we didn't sit down and play test everything and then like make a bunch of changes. Like we were rolling changes every single day as we incorporated new things, and like, how does this work within the rules? How do we get this card to be even cooler? So it's a really like very fertile, like creative period, I feel like.
Okay,
all right, sorry,
I
Jim.
have a question now. Well, I have a question that maybe will inform Jim's answer. So, it sounds to me though that like the early cards, that effect when you were in school and the person who had to give their science fair presentation first didn't have the benefit of seeing everybody ahead of them go. So by the time you get halfway through, the quality is much improved. And then by the time you're at the end, there's so much iteration. So how did you account for or adjust for that when interacting with the earlier couple of cards?
Yeah, well, we knew this was going to be a problem. So we obviously had the base rule set to go by. And then we literally had a who wants to go first? And I seem to remember Greeno, I'm sure he signed himself up as the last card. And I quickly jumped on the penultimate card to be designed because I wanted to see all the other cards beforehand. I was too scared to go first. I think we had somebody who had to drop out, and then therefore I had to kind of take a sooner position. But yeah, as Ian and Manny have said, that we designed the cards. Literally, it was like people had, I think it was like a day each or something. I think the idea was that we would get everybody's ideas down, and then we would see. It wasn't a case of once we've got all the cards, that's it, the game's done. We're not that naive. We thought, let's get the ideas down. Everybody knows the game, the feel and the zeitgeist of the kind of game we're trying to achieve. So what do people feel would be a cool ability? Given now we've got some groundwork, what do you think would be a cool ability for this card? And I think we all try to outdo ourselves a little bit, outdo everybody else. Some of the cards, without giving too much away, we'll probably get to this. The current state of the game it's a bit swingy, to say the least. It's very wild. We have cards that do lots of things, and what we're missing is those cards that aren't too great but need to be there for other cards. But that's because we have 18 cards and 18 designers, and we didn't want to discourage this. We wanted to see what ideas could come out. I will say that as cards went on, yeah, obviously, as Ian said, like cards can play on previous cards, but we did not want to discourage anything. We didn't want to lay any ground rules whereby designer X has to design the crappy card that nobody wants. We just didn't want that. We wanted everybody to get their ideas across, and then we would go through a process of development whereby people have to kind of put their ego aside, and we go, okay, what's best for the game?
Right.
Spoiler, we're not quite there yet, but
Yeah, and I think just to add two things. I think the strong theme helped a lot because you sort of have these kind of tropes of. I mean, so if it's not obvious, the theme is sort of a heist, right? I know we're not going to go into detail on the rules, but it's a heist game, and so you have the stereotypical sort of tropes, the driver and the muscle and like those kinds of things, right? And so I think those strong um, tropes and stereotypes I think helped a lot because then somebody would choose a character type that they wanted to do, and that would help inform their special power. So I think that certainly helped. The other thing is, I almost think the opposite, Abby, from your question. I was blown away by the first card, by the second card, by the third card. I mean, those first few, it was so far from what I had thought was in this design space that I remember. I think the first card was like, what was it called? I'm looking at the document now. The Opportunist. So I don't know if you guys remember the Opportunist, but essentially, it just sort of took what was in my mind sort of a set element. Like there's these three locations, these three loot cards that are part of the game from the beginning, and you're trying to win those locations, win that loot, and it all of a sudden created a way to turn a character into a fourth loot type. And my mind was just like boom, and that was like the first card. I was like, oh my god, here we go. It's just like totally changes the board state in just one card. And I think it was Jim that said this. You get a little bit of this, like everybody wants to outdo and out crazy each other, right? And you don't want to be the one that does the boring card. And so that's bad. Good, but potentially disastrous.
Nobody wants to be Hawkeye in Avengers. Is what it is. It's like,
yeah.
Okay, so thinking about what the mechanism of managing that sort of data flow looks like and keeping track of each of the moving pieces, what was your actual infrastructure? I'm assuming that it was technological. I assume it involved spreadsheets and possibly a fair amount of swearing on whoever the keeper of the spreadsheet was on their part. Who was your keeper of the spreadsheets and the infrastructure, and how did that work?
I think the universe kept it. I don't know.
Mr. Google.
Yeah, Mr. Yeah, whoever's in the back end of Mr. Google. I think Ian mentioned this. We quickly broke out into smaller teams. So I created some sort of random teams that I thought of would be useful. So we had things like, I guess we have still, teams like play testing. And so we had a play testing team. There was a couple people volunteered for that. We had a rules editor or developer team, I think we called it. And so we had a couple people that volunteered for that. We even had, one of these sort of crazy things that happens when you have 18 people throwing ideas around. We ended up with a cultural sensitivity team, which actually came in super handy because this can be a landmine of a theme, right? If you're not careful. And so, that we had somebody in that group that had some experience with cultural sensitivity issues and was sort of working on the back end. You guys, Jim and Ian, you probably didn't know this, but he was working on the back end, kind of working with some of the designers to try to change a little bit of the words they were using and the sort of topics they were dealing with. And so I think that helped a lot. No one really kept the spreadsheet. I mean, people just kept adding stuff to it. The design, I would say, if one group really did a ton of work keeping stuff, was the graphic design team. They created this unbelievable. I've never used Figma before, but they created this unbelievable template where, and for some people this is going to be like duh, obviously, but for me it was like certainly not technologically savvy. It blew my mind. We have a spreadsheet, and it's got a column for the card value, for the description, for the picture, for whatever, and literally all each of us have to do is on our day we enter in the data points for our card, and it shows up and it's ready for print and play. It's ready for tabletop simulator. It's all sort of has all the cut lines and everything, and it all fits perfectly. It works perfectly, and that I think was a huge help because I think it allowed people to focus, see the actual physical product immediately. I mean, you could just hit refresh and it would show up immediately, and it allowed the playtesting team to much more seamlessly sort of throw something on Tabletop Simulator and test it out. You know, I think we started testing it when we had 4 cards, I think, like really early on to try to see where we were headed.
Okay. You used a term that maybe lay people listening or baby designers listening don't know. What's Figma?
Anybody else want to answer that? Ian, do you?
Yeah, Ian, I think you know better than us. I don't think any of us three do. One of our team members, Jay, I may have got this wrong. I think it was Jay that set it up. It's basically a graphic design tool. I think it's mainly web-based. I could be doing this a massive disservice. But essentially, you drag in data from a spreadsheet, and you can basically, a little bit like pulling in data into something like Illustrator or something.
Sort of the unofficial tagline is something like the Illustrator of, or the Google Docs of Illustrator, or something like that. Like it's basically a platform where it's all online, as far as I know, and you can collaboratively graphically design something. So the way that the basics of it, and I am a layperson, so maybe this will speak to the lay people in the audience. So sorry to cut you off, Tim.
Sorry.
But we had a template of a card, and it had different zones in it, right? So it had a little area where the value would go in the top right-hand corner or whatever it was, a little area where the title would go, an area at the bottom where the power would go or whatever, right? You set that template, and then you link it back to a Google spreadsheet, which looks like an Excel file for those that use Excel, and each column is labeled, right? So the column says, special ability, value, or whatever. And as a user, all we had to do was I put in a 5 into the value, and then a 5 would pop up in my card in Figma. It's Figma.com for those that are interested. FIGMA.com.
I love that.
Even
go ahead, Jim.
No, I was just going to say, and to add theme to the cards and stuff. There's even like a kind of an image URL there, so you could pick an image from the internet. I mean, obviously we're not selling this right now, so it's only in development, so we could pick any image we want. But as long as there's a URL you could point to, Figma would drag that in, and then you could just print out your cards. I mean, I have some of those right here. It's so easy just to alter the data and then print it out and play it, or as Manny said, throw this into Tabletop Simulator. And sorry, go on. I interrupted again.
Oh no, that's fine. It's your panel. I was going to say the thing that I was being amused by is that I asked the question, and all three of your faces said, and then magic, and that seems to be kind of the theme of this project. Is we're not really sure how, but magic. Can you tell me a little bit about where the project is now? Because you just mentioned that it's still in development. You've mentioned doing some playtesting on Tabletop Simulator. You've mentioned that you're not actually sure who or where it might be published. So I would love to start with Ian and go around and get your current recap on where the project stands from your perspective.
So we have a playable game. To be clear, it's not perfect, but it is like a final design, which, considering how weird and ambitious this whole thing was, I think most of us are pretty happy that we ended up with something where it's not completely broken. It doesn't, fall apart the moment you look at it. It's actually like a playable game. We actually, the three of us just this week did a playtest on Tabletop Simulator, kind of just looking at the project from a couple of different angles, sort of figuring out where we want to go. There's definitely still some development that needs done. But it's surprising. As far as for me, I think we achieved the goal that I was after, which was to meet a bunch of cool designers, learn from them, and then end up with a playable thing at the end of it.
Okay, Jim, your turn.
So yeah, I agree. I'm surprised that we have something that is playable, quite frankly, given the chaos. From my perspective, one of the problems of having, I mentioned like a kind of a card agnostic rule set earlier on. One of the problems that I see with the game right now, I'm going to kind of do this traditional English thing where doom and gloom. I don't mean there's doom and gloom. These are challenges that kind of face us if we want to really develop this game into something that's tight and cohesive and something that you'd be, willing to show other people out in the real world so they could go, you guys are just not crazy. This is actually quite cool. The rule set almost left the design space wide open. That's kind of the point. Kind of mentioned, we all mentioned earlier on that we wanted every designer to have their say. The problem with that is that every designer had their say. And what I mean by that is that the design space that we've investigated is very, very wide. Now, we have 18 cards, which basically means almost by definition that any part of that design space is underpopulated. If let's say, for example, in one of my own designs, and I think we've talked about this as well, Ian and Manny, and possibly many others on the Button Shy Discord. If we'd have done this project on our own, we would have kind of identified a few mechanics, a few parts of the design space, and we would have gone to town on those and how those things interact with each other. What we've done now, we're very broad and not very deep. Maybe that's not the right word, but we're very broad mechanically. So it doesn't feel tied in enough. So one of the things that we're facing going forward, from my perspective, is that I think we need to get a little bit brutal and go, this is a cool card, but you know what we need to do is we need to kill it so that the other cards are better. And I don't mind if that's my card or Manny's card or Ian's card. It doesn't really matter. I think we need to kind of... We've through playtesting, we've found some mechanics that work kind of nicely, and I think what we need to do is go, okay, given the base rule set, given the mechanics that seem to be, let's double down on those and maybe get rid of some of the peripheral ones so that we can create a rule set that's a bit more holistic, because right now we've got lots of cards that do lots of crazy things, and that's fun, but it makes some of the results of games feel somewhat arbitrary sometimes. Anyway, I shall pass on to Manny for his thoughts.
Yeah, I think I think all those points are dead on. I think it's a much more serious part of the project. It feels like in a few different ways. As chaotic and fun and crazy as the first few phases of this have been, I think now we're kind of like, this now, it feels like, to me at least, that as Ian said, we have a playable game, and I think we could all walk away happy with what we've created. But if we want it to be something that is eventually published, the real work begins now, and I think it's not.
Yes.
I personally don't think maybe that it's something that can be done with 18 people. I think at this point we probably need to sort of. We've been wrestling with this. How do we take kind of a couple people that want to take this forward, continue development, pitch it to a few publishers, do that whole thing, in a way that you can do that and not have 18 different opinions, right? At some point you need to have the editor, right? You need to be able to slash things and move things around and all that. So one of the things that we did recently, which was actually kind of interesting, was, I don't know if it was earlier this past week. A couple of us met with an attorney, which is crazy that we did that, but it was interesting. We had been pushing around the idea of, okay, well, if we're going to go to a publisher, Jim mentioned that Jason Tagmeyer is a part of the team. And again, we had no expectation that Button Shy would publish this at all. But he brought his perspective, which was great. As a publisher, he said, listen, 18 designers, 18 different decision makers, 18 sign-offs. There's no way someone, I as a publisher, and I can't imagine too many, would publish it like this, right? You need some sort of agreement between all of you assigning rights to one or two people. Otherwise, it's just not going to move forward, and no publisher would really take it seriously. And so, a little bit of a cart before the horse thing. We're sort of now at this late stage trying to come up with some sort of, MOU, some sort of agreement, something that we can all sign and say, we give this one person or these two people the rights to continue to develop the game and pitch it to publishers and make decisions that are in the interest of the group as much as
MOU?
possible.
What is
Memorandum of Understanding.
And what does so that would actually be just establishing that person had the group's permission to represent this item?
Yes, exactly. And so, I don't think any of us are attorneys. I'm not sure. Actually, I don't know. The other funny thing, we didn't mention this, but this is literally the first time that Ian, Jim, and I have seen each other's faces. We mentioned that we are all pretty much strangers. I think there are maybe like 2 or 3 people that know each other in the group, but the rest of us are total strangers. So I don't think any of us are attorneys, but yeah, so we had to come up with some agreement. So hopefully we'll have something in place that we can all sign and be comfortable with. Basically saying, we're going to give the rights to these, to 1 or 2 people to move the project forward. Yes, so it got kind of serious all of a sudden, which was funny, but.
Yes, it did. And when we started talking about this, almost like the wind was out of the sails for a short time. I used to write like a weekly. One of the things we wanted to do, I think maybe Jason asked for this, was could you do like a weekly, just for the sake of everybody else, because we have our own private channel on the Button Shy Discord, but then the greater Discord design channel on Discord. On the Button Shy Discord, we're also, people there were interested in what we were doing. So I agreed to do a weekly update. I've not done a weekly update now for maybe 3 weeks or so, because once we started talking about the memorandum of understanding, it kind of almost gets serious at that point. It's like, okay, who really has the editorial power here? In my opinion, not to put Manny on the spot, but it's always been Manny. His crazy idea. It's like in for a penny, in for a pound. And I don't think there's I don't know. I mean, I don't want to put words into anybody's mouth, but I don't think there are many egos there in the sense that, well, if my card isn't in the game as per specs, then it's all over. I think everybody's pretty much of the mindset that this was a cool experiment. It's one of the cool things about it. It's a nice way to get to know other people. Maybe even a few people could like branch off and do a thing together because they get on particularly well. That in itself makes the whole experiment worthwhile, in my opinion. That's where we are right now. It's how do we move forward? How do we develop this into something that's tight?
It's interesting because I've seen many projects where there have been no egos involved, but the instant that something is making real money, that's where the teeth and the claws come out. And I assume that like part of what you're doing with the lawyer is working to sort that out and figure out how you're structuring all of those agreements before you move forward.
Ian, you want to talk about the money aspect?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I think one of the things that we've talked about is sort of how do we find a way to release this that doesn't necessarily bring in as much of that challenge. So, we talked about ideas like releasing it as a free print and play. But since most of us aren't publishers, we kind of want some more oversight. We don't want to just release a raw game into the world without some kind of editing process. One of the things that I think most of us, I'd like to say all of us are on board for, would be having any money earned that would normally go to designers would instead go to like a charity or an organization that works for like criminal justice reform. Something that, rather than having each designer say, "Oh, I need to make $200 off of this," or whatever, finding a way to be more generous with it instead of battling over pennies amongst ourselves.
Yeah, I think thanks, Ian. I want to just add to that quickly. I think that's helped a ton from the very, very beginning. This is probably one of the first, maybe the first week or so. Somebody suggested, hey, maybe we should, if we do eventually get it published or put it out for pay what you will or whatever, right? Can we just donate all of the designer fees or anything that we would make to charity? And I think everybody agreed. I don't think I haven't seen anybody say no. And so I think that's helped a lot because that kind of removes that part of it. It's just like, okay, we're all good with that. And whatever agreement we come up with, I expect it to have that none of us is going to make a penny. I think there's some disagreement as to whether the publisher should be allowed to or not. So I think that's a different discussion. But certainly from a designer perspective, I think we've all decided, yep, it's a fun project. We've gotten everything we want out of it. I think a few of us are published designers, but many of us are not. Some of us are not, and I think it would be super neat. I just know, having seen my game out in the wild with my name on it, was super cool. So I think personally, I would love for other people to be able to have that feeling, and so that's why I think some of us are pushing for that kind of publisher route, just because it's such a neat thing, right? For someone to be able to have their name on something. So
Absolutely.
I think that's the only compensation we're expecting. I'm sorry? Thank you.
Thank you, Nine.
Okay, there is a name mentioned specifically in the document you shared with me, but I don't want to shout it out if you guys don't want to talk about it. But none of you have mentioned him, so I'm bringing it up in case that's a point you want to hit.
Yeah, I think you're probably talking about Zachary or Zachary. Yeah. So one of the designers, as we were getting into this, we kind of talked about this already, but as we were getting into the whole legal issue of it, we come up with a couple of sample or draft agreements. I think I put out a couple of different versions of an agreement. And then at some point someone said, listen, I think we'd be well served to talk to an actual attorney that has experience with tabletop contracts and game contracts in general. And so I'm probably going to butcher his name, but he was great. Zachary Strebbeck. I think he's, some of you guys that have done tabletop design or even video game design may know him already. I think that's pretty much his focus is game contracts and game related legal issues. So he offered us sort of a free 20-minute session, and we met with him earlier this week, ran some ideas past him, and now we're at a point where probably within the next day or two, I'm going to put a poll out to the group, see if folks want to move forward with hiring him for a fee. And he would draft an agreement for us that then we would then hopefully sign and move forward. So so that's Zachary Strebbeck. It's Strebeck. He was amazing to talk to. He was really super helpful.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that if it was a point that mattered, that you got to touch on it.
Yeah. No, I think I certainly want to put his name out there. I think he's been a huge help so far.
All right, so we are at about 7 minutes before the end of the hour, and the way that I would love to wrap up is if each of you in turn, and I'm going to start with Jim because I haven't picked on him first for any of these questions yet. Tell me one thing that surprised you about the process and one thing that you learned about collaborating with big groups.
You know what? I knew something like this was going to turn up and I didn't actually prepare for it. One thing that surprised me. Okay. I was surprised it's still continuing, quite frankly. That's not to disparage anybody else that's a part of this team. When Manny's idea seemed like, I got to admit, I probably had a few beers or something when I saw Manny's original post, and I thought, why not? Why not? I mean, like I mentioned maybe earlier, I've kind of very much a hobby kind of board game designer, a card game designer, because it's totally different to my day job of video game design, which is that's like, that's super serious. The board game, card game design is the stuff I arguably really love, and I love it because it's not serious. But I thought this would kind of fall through very, very quickly, and yet I don't know why. It's become quieter over the last few weeks. People have gotten busy, life happens. but I'm surprised we are where we are. So that's the surprise bit. Sorry, what was the next bit? I can't
What have
remember.
you learned about collaborating with big groups?
What have I learned? That there are people that you. I mean, it was difficult. I mean, with this one, as Manny and Ian have said, none of us really know each other. This is the first time we've actually seen our faces, seen each other's faces. I'm amazed by what people bring to a project. We talked about the way that the project, just the logistics of it, making cars and things. And until this panel, I've not even considered that was an issue because it hasn't been an issue for us. And I can imagine now thinking about it. Oh yeah, that could be a real issue if there weren't people that stepped up and created all these cool tools that I've got to admit I just took for granted. That was awesome. Working with these people, I never expected that to happen, but now I think about it. Maybe I've taken it for granted, but now I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking, yeah, that's a really cool thing. That was really nice to see. I think at the time I was surprised that people could just bring these tools to the table. I think I took them for granted so quickly that
That's really cool. All right, Ian, your turn.
So I would say I'm also kind of surprised by the same thing. Like I'm surprised how smoothly it worked and how we kind of joked early on like, oh, too many cooks. That's I think sort of how we got onto too many crooks. But it turns out like when you have a bunch of talented people with different skill sets, different viewpoints, all working together, you can actually make something like really cool, really interesting. And it went, I think, pretty smoothly, which really truthfully surprised me. And I think for me, I mean, I've just learned so much. I think maybe what I've really learned is that you got to just jump in and do it. Maybe like, have some semblance of rules before you start making cards, but like, jump in and do it. Don't sit back and think like, oh, I don't know how to make this. Like, jump in, talk to somebody, find somebody that you know who has experience with whatever you're trying to do and get their knowledge and then take it and do something with it. I think for me, this has been really like liberating of just like, let's just get creating. Don't and wait for somebody else to show you, like jump in.
Thank you. Manny?
Yeah, so I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record because I think that's the kind of stuff that surprised me too. I think early on, I would say our unofficial tagline is "Embrace the chaos." Right? That's sort of our mantra that we repeat over and over again. And it has, I guess, what surprised me the most is that as chaotic as it's been, out of that, we sort of like come up with something that's workable. And I think a big part of that is, I think to me, what I learned about working in a big group is that if you encourage and empower people to do the things that they're interested in, every single person in this group has had a very different experience of this process. There are people that literally have come in, created one card, and move on with their lives, right? And that's perfectly fine. And it's been great. That's all we asked them to do was create one card. And then there are people that, like, I think probably the three of us that have been on this call, certainly me, that for those first few weeks, I lived and breathed this stuff. I loved it. I had such a great time kind of throwing ideas out and collaborating with folks. So I think as long as you empower folks to do the things that they're interested in, I think you'll find all of a sudden people create stuff. And you're like, oh, great, somebody dealt with that thing. So yeah, that's my takeaway.
That's fantastic. Over in the chat for the stream, Jason Tagmeyer just offered to take responsibility for kicking off a 54 cards with 54 designers project.
Oh no!
He says that here. That's not true at all. That's a lie.
He did in fact ask the question, 54 cards for 54 designers, and I just assumed he was taking responsibility, right?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm down. I'm down, Dave. Count me in.
So ordinarily at this point, what I would do is ask you to tell the internet where to find you, but you beforehand you told me that you would rather that I point everybody to the Button Shy Discord, and I'm sure there's probably a link on the Button Shy website where people can get to that. Does anybody have any last 10-second thought you want to add?
Just work with other people that you. I mean, I am very kind of normally very introspective. I'm not a put myself out there person. Work with other people. You'll be amazed at what you can find.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I hope that by next year you come and talk to us about where it's being sold and what that process looks like.
Thank you guys so much for doing
Yeah,
this.
thank you
Yeah.
for having us, for sure.
Thanks very much. Yeah.